Hello everyone, Santa here, and welcome to my life and channel update for June 2022. And as I've been thinking about this past month, there's been a lot of different things that have happened. I finished the Majora's Mask Let's Play series with my sister, so the final one of those episodes has gone out, and I am glad to be done with editing those videos for a while. I like doing the series, but it's also nice to have a break from the editing, which is not the part I'm the most fond of, but at least I figured out techniques for making it move more efficiently. A lot of what I've been doing this month, though, has been working on my game, Psychopomps Are Missing. And one of the big things that I have started doing this month, actually, is to make builds available for people to download, with the links being in my Discord server in the game development channel. So if that's something that you're interested in, that would be a place to go check them out. I'm eventually going to move them to being behind a paywall, probably just in the Patreon-only part of my Discord server, but not there quite yet. I feel like more of the game's content needs to be in place, more of polish needs to be there before I feel like that's a step that I want to take. So it's something you can go check out. There's actually two different builds there, because one of the big projects that I underwent this month was a pretty big update and overhaul to the class system in Psychopomps Are Missing, which I've gone over in a bit more detail in the recent playtest video that came out. So there will be a card to that popping up with a link to the first video in the playtest series where I was testing those changes that you can go check out for some details there to kind of see it in action. But to kind of go over, I was glancing over, one of the things that I do on my Patreon is I do a daily diary that I call Dear Patrons. And so I was just glancing through, because I save all of them as text documents, and I was glancing through some of them, just kind of refresh myself of what I've done this month. And it's interesting to just kind of see where I go from I'm having problems with this system to, okay, now I've been spending a bunch of time changing things. So there's been a number of big changes to the game that I kind of want to talk about a little bit, because I think they're interesting. I do need to make the quarterly report article, so there's probably going to be a bit of redundancy there. I do once a quarter an article just on, like, where is the game towards completion. But to kind of go over some of the things that I've changed in Project Psychopomps Are Missing, aside from some stuff for being publicly available after a fashion, so I added a disclaimer of, like, this is super in development, everyone. I had the title more of a title screen that's also like, this is super placeholder and in development, everyone, and all that sort of stuff. Some NPC dialogue that's meant to highlight some useful tips and other things about how the game works, because the tutorials aren't there. But the big thing was this big overhaul to the class system, like I was mentioning. I also reworked types. This is something else that I realized. I feel like I may have mentioned this at some point, but I couldn't tell you where offhand. So I introduced types into the game a while back. These are defensive types. I've had 9 damage types. Slashing, piercing, striking, fire, ice, lightning, arcane, divine, and abyssal. So those are the 9 damage types. But I was like, it's really hard to know what enemies are weak to, and so I wrote an article about how did I write an article? I don't know. I did a thing where somewhere where I talked about, I do things in so many different places. It's hard for me to keep track of where they are at this point. But like, was it a random tweet thread? Was it something I was just musing in Dear Patrons? Did I write some sort of article on it? I don't think I wrote an article on it. But I realized that I think it was probably in Dear Patrons. I realized that, like, the defensive types, because I did write an article about, like, wanting to add defensive types, because that allows you to be able to be like, oh, it's this thing is weak to that, so I can know what's strong. But when you have multiple types, it started to become really murky, because I wasn't being formulaic about it. Like, so if something was an insect, it took like 30% more damage from lightning and ice damage and striking damage, as an example. And maybe if it was a spirit, it would take like half damage from, like, say, striking. So if it was a spirit insect and it was one's the 30% more and another's half, and those are being multiplied together, like, it it's the sort of thing where with the information you're being provided, it becomes murky of like, okay, but what is the relationship between these two? Is it going to be resistant? Is it going to actually be weak to it? Is it going to end up kind of more neutral? So what I kind of realized is that the way Pokemon works with its typing, everything is very clear. If it's immune, regardless of what it's paired with, because it's multiplicative. As times 0 is 0. If it's neutral, it's a times 1. If it resists, it's 50%. And if it's super effective, it's times 2. So you know if something is both, if one type is resistant and another type is weak, then it's neutral because they 0.5 or 1/2 times 2 is 1. So that makes for a lot of clarity of being able to understand how types interact with each other. And I realized that was a big flaw with the way that I set up my system, is that that clarity was not there. So I went through and I just rebalanced everything so that way stuff was like 50% or 200%, half or times 2, multipliers, or straight up immune, or 1. Like, that's how types interact with the 9 damage types, and that helps make things a lot clearer. I hope that's the hope long term, is that it'll just be like, oh, this is a beast. Beasts are weak to these things; they resist these things. Oh, this is a beast plus something else. Then it's going to interact this way. That's ultimately where I'm wanting things to go. I think I need to do a few more tweaks just for balance reasons. Some enemies are way too weak to certain things. It's like, oh, this is a rogue wearing this sort of armor that makes it super weak to divine damage, and you're just one-shotting them in a bit too spectacular of a fashion. So there's going to be some tweaks that I'm going to need to do to kind of balance things out. But the other thing that I also was doing in this process is I was trying to be very conscious about, okay, I want types that are a little bit like normal or dragon in Pokemon, where it's like they're not really super effective against a whole lot, but not very much resists them either. Like normal's not super effective against anything, but against most types is a neutral hit. And dragon especially, and psychic to an extent as well, but like dragon is like, okay, it's generally a neutral hit. So it's not going to be especially powerful against anything, but it's very rare that anything's going to resist it. So I specifically tried to make striking and arcane a little bit more like that, where if you're not 100% sure, using one of them is probably going to land you in at least neutral territory a lot of the time. I'm not sure how well I kind of hit that. Some of it's going to be a frequency game where stuff showing up more frequently. This is one of those things where it's like I can have 20 different types, but if 3 of those types show up a lot and the other types don't show up very much, then those 3 types are the ones that really dictate sort of what the overall formulation is, because it's not what the balance between the types is, it's the frequency of those types. So like if you're playing a Pokemon game and you're fighting an awful lot of ground type Pokemon, then water and grass are going to be disproportionate, and ice are going to be disproportionately strong, and electricity is going to be very weak in that sort of environment because of what you're facing. And so when you have a mixture of types, then things can start like it shifts where the biases of what's good based upon predominance of things. It's a whole sort of thing about like frequency and all that sort of stuff. So I did that to try to help some of that, but the big thing that I did is I overhauled the class stuff. And what I was running into as a problem with my character classes, because I've gotten enough games sort of made that I've been and tweaked things enough to the point where I was getting more characters to final class state and able to test out how that played. So I was getting more of a feel for final classes. And what I was finding is I had this kind of dichotomy where early on I'm trying to get you skills as quickly as possible, because you would start off with no skills and you'd have to kind of build that up. And it was this thing where like that initial, like the game combat system just doesn't feel good to play if you don't have skills available. It's built around having some skill selection, some skill choice, where you're having to make decisions about what skill you want to use. And so early on, when you have like no skills, it's like I just want to get you through this phase of not having skills. But what ended up happening is by the time you got to your final class, you had so many skills that a lot of them were kind of superfluous. I don't think I'm pronouncing that word quite correctly, but that's the word that I wanted. There, some of them feel redundant, some of them feel extra, and you just have a lot of skills to sort through, so it can be hard to remember what you actually have. And characters are a little bit mushy because it's like, okay, I've made this character, and they have like 20 skills that they've picked up in the course of getting to whatever wizard. Fairy, whatever. They have a bunch of different skills, and it's like, okay, but which one do I really want to use? And it just, the other thing that I was running into as a problem is it didn't feel like there was meaningful choices that you're making during level up. Like, you were like, everything had to go through hero at one point in time. And I've done a couple of rejiggers of the relationship between classes and requirements to kind of break that a little bit. But it's like, okay, the skills that were available in hero, heroic strike is a skill that would it's an attack skill, it's a weapon attack, and if it's critical hit, you gain some HP. And then there was Aura of Zeal. I mean, these skills are all here. I don't know why I'm using past tense. But Aura of Zeal, which gives all of your party members an aura that grants them increased stamina regeneration. It's very good. Has some downsides in that it applies an aura to all of your party members, which will overwrite other auras. That is maybe not something that you want to do. And it costs a lot of stamina to use, but you get that back pretty quickly if it's up. Strength of Heart, which is a healing skill based upon your attack stat. So it heals target ally based upon your attack. Burning Heart, which is a spell that deals fire damage based upon your attack stat. And then a skill called Heroism, which has been going through some iterations because I've not been happy with it. Right now, it's plus defense, and when you block, you'll intercept attacks against allies with low HP. Which is pretty good. So what I've run into as a problem is the fairy can't use many of those skills. It has very low attack and mostly wants to be a spellcaster. So 2 of those skills were immediately off the table. Heroism maybe could be, maybe wouldn't be, depending upon what you're wanting to kind of do. You can use the attack skill with a tome, which is a magical attack. So like if you had to get 3 levels in hero, it's like, okay, well, there's only 3 skills that I'd even sort of want to use as a fairy, and 2 of them are basically worthless because as fairy doesn't have an attack stat. It's a magical caster and a healer. It doesn't have an attack stat. So that sort of thing would happen in a number of different places. Another example is Magical Girl is one of the classes that is like very much a spellcaster type class as well, that has gone through some changes, but at the time was very much like can use all weapons as magical weapons, so they all run off of the magic stat. But that means that the Magical Girl basically didn't have an attack stat either, but had to go through a bunch of weapon classes because I was trying to get weapon skills on her. And what ended up happening is like there were skills where it's like, there's nothing I want from, say, Rogue, for example, which the Magical Girl has traditionally had to go through. Like, there's a skill that buffs your attack that you don't use. There's some, like, 2 martial arts, and then there was, like, an attack skill, like, and you can't really use martial arts because you don't have an attack stat, right? And then there was an attack skill that is like, okay, maybe this or maybe the preparation that makes my weapons deal poison damage. But one of the things is you could only have 1 preparation on at a time. This is something I'm actually looking to change, but that's not something I've done just yet. So it's just the sort of thing where you would run into this this issue. Keep hydrated, folks. Where it's like, okay, I have to get like 3 levels of Rogue, and I want 1.5 skills from Rogue. And it's like, this is not really a compelling, interesting choice, right? When it's like, I don't really want that. And then other times it's just be like, yeah, so there's a lot of different things going on with that. And so that was something that I was running into as a problem as well. And I'm like, I want meaningful choices. And I'd been trying to figure out how to do this. And I'm like, well, I could add more skills to each class. That way there's more options. Maybe you want something from there. But I'm like, do I really want to do that? So I had all of these sorts of problems going on where, like, early game, I want you to get access to more skills more rapidly, but that was pushing you to move through things kind of quickly. And towards the end, you were ending up with too many skills. And it didn't feel like the choices were compelling or interesting because it was like, okay, whatever. I have to, get so many skills, and I don't really want. It's like you hit the saturation point, right? Where it's like, oh, you're going towards fairy and you're having to go through cleric, and it's like, okay, there's other healing classes that you're having to go through, and you really only need like maybe 2 cleric skills, and other things are just going to start becoming redundant with the other classes you're going through. So it's like, oh, well, in that case, like, I guess these are the choices that I picked to not overlap functionality too much, and feel like I'm wasting like skill picks, is this whole issue. So I ran into this difficulty, and so it's the sort of thing where like I don't know how to solve this particular problem. So what do I do when I run into a problem like that? I pray about it, and a few minutes later I was like, oh, here is an answer. And so what that solution is have it so that way when you are in a class, you automatically get access to all of that class's skills, but there are significantly fewer levels. And instead of things requiring, 3 or 4 skills, like 3 or 4 levels into a class, which is like 2 to 3 skills, most things are only going to require 1. The fairy is probably going to require 2 of a couple of different classes, just because there's very few classes that I want to be required for fairy, and its experience requirements are very low at the moment. But make it so that way, at most, you can get 2 skills from a class. And I'm trying out an exception on one character that can get 3, and has slightly faster experience gain rates. Don't know how that's going to turn out, but it's something to try. And so along with that process, so what I've done is I've set it up so that way all character classes get access to, when you're in that class, all of its skills are available to you, and then you pick like 1, maybe 2, if you want to stay in there extra long to master before you move on. And then I slowed down the rate of experience gain. This solves multiple problems, right? It solves the problem where you're not getting access to enough skills at the beginning, because it's like, okay, now you have whatever class you're in, you have all those skills available, but it also means you're not keeping most of those, so you have fewer skills that you're taking along with you. I also think it encourages you more to spend a bit more time in the development process, because it means that you're wanting to get, say, another skill from mage because maybe you want some more of the damage type variety, because it's like, oh, I got flare and I'm dealing a fire damage spell, but maybe I also want to be able to deal a lightning damage spell, and you grab, what do you even call that? There's too many like lightning skills that are kind of like semi-similar, so I can't remember if it's like lightning strike, lightning bolt, what exactly I named it. But one of the other things that I needed to do in this process, so that was a whole process of like overhauling the relationship between character classes yet again. That's a fairly easy thing to do because I have my tool that I use for it, that I've shown off previously. But I had to go through and think through, okay, how do I want to do these relationships again? I overhauled the experience system to just, instead of trying to do a formula, it just indexes into an array now of like how much experience is required for this level. It just solves things, makes my life easier. But I also, so I did that, and then I went to, I'm having to think here. I also needed to do a bunch of skill overhauls. So there's a couple of different things here, and I'm not quite sure. So one of the things that I wanted to do at this time was overhaul all of the classes' like stats and properties and stuff, and kind of go over those things again, just try to dial them in a bit more. And one of the things I did is part of that is I more intentionally thought about how to differentiate the various final classes from each other, because I felt that a lot of them are beginning to overlap quite a bit, where a lot of them are kind of like, I'm a fast attacker in both things, both physical attacks and magical attacks, and just kind of felt like everything was kind of a little bit mushy, and there's too much similarity. So I put in a bunch of time to like try to differentiate where they sit in terms of what their roles are, what sort of things they're maybe not as great at, and to introduce some more unique mechanics. So, for example, the wizard is able to now wield a staff, either a cleric staff or a mage's staff, in their offhand slot. That took a bit of working to make actually work successful, but I'm happy to have added it. The magical girl has like shifted to more of a spellcaster focus and no longer wields a weapon. Instead, the class dual wields offhands. So that gives you some different choices there. And a few other things have been tweaked as well. I overhauled the way armor works because that was something that I was having issues with and disliking. A lot of different things. So with a lot of these big changes that I'm making, but particularly the class one, I wanted to save out a build with that state because I think it's interesting to look at the contrast between that and then what I've done afterwards. So I made that first, before I did the big class overhaul build, available on my Discord. Again, there's a link to my Discord and Patreon and all those sorts of things in the description. But I overhauled that, and then I also have now made a build after doing that big overhaul. Stuff definitely needs balancing. There's some bugs that need fixing. As always, there's tweaks that need to happen that I'll be getting to here. But so that's you can do a comparison if you want to of like what was this like before the overhaul, was it like after, and it's a pretty big difference, I think. So that's a lot of what I've been doing this month, is doing that particular set of changes. So I think that's all I really want to talk about. Plans going forward is, of course, continuing to work on the game, figuring out marketing better to some extent. It's something I need to get better at, I feel like. But let's see. Yeah. At some point in time, my sister and I do want to play Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and maybe a couple of other games that we've enjoyed, such as Star Fox Adventures Dinosaur Planet. There's no definite plans on any of that, though. So just keep watching the space. If that's something that sounds interesting to you, we do want to start those at some point. But our priorities are kind of elsewhere at the moment. So maybe sometime later this summer we'll get started with Wind Waker. So yeah, those are kind of what's going on right now. And I thank you all very much for watching. Until next time, everyone. Take care. Goodbye.